wind is set to cause disruption, which is why warnings have been issued. Meanwhile, in Northern Ireland, it will be pretty cloudy, although it should stay largely dry around midday. Rain will arrive in the afternoon, though, and it will become increasingly windy too.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. We have plenty coming up, including our big topic of the day, Russia and Ukraine. Is there unfinished business to be done? We'll be speaking to a wealth of guests to unpack it all from different angles. I'll also be talking to my dear friend Natasha Kapinski about her unique role in Holocaust Memorial Day. But first, with the full news update, here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says the picture on Ukraine's border is increasingly concerning as he's urging Russia to avoid a reckless and catastrophic invasion. The Prime Minister's comments come as he considers doubling the number of troops deployed to strengthen Europe's borders. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss confirmed Britain will publish new legislation this week to broaden the scope of sanctions that can be applied to Moscow. Former senior British Army officer General Barney White-Spunner told GB News he believes President Putin is bluffing.
He's seen a West that hasn't been particularly resolute to act. I mean, he's been able to do what he's wanted in Kazakhstan, in Belarus. As I said earlier, he's seen us pull out of Afghanistan. But actually now he's got himself into a position where he's coming up against opposition. I think there is an element, obviously, of sort of bluff going on here. But if that bluff is called, then arguably it could be quite dangerous.
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have insisted the planned rise in national insurance set for April is the right thing to do. That's despite opposition parties and some Conservative MPs saying it should be halted over the increase in the cost of living faced by the nation. Writing in the Sunday Times, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have insisted the 1.25% national insurance rise will help clear NHS backlog. Andrew Rossendale, Conservative MP for Romford, believes raising taxes isn't the answer.
Not what the people want. They don't want taxes to rise, but I also understand the government have to balance the books, and we have a huge black hole. After the pandemic, the government have spent way too much, far too much than we can really afford. We are in the biggest national debt we've ever had. So I do understand why they're bringing this in, though I don't personally think it's right.
The government says Wolverhampton and Sheffield will be the first of 20 disadvantaged areas to gain access to a £1.5 billion fund. It's part of levelling up plans. The money will be used to develop new neighbourhoods on derelict or disused land. But Lisa Nandy, Labour's shadow levelling up secretary, accused the government of handing out rehashed pots of money and policies. Ministers say the new plans will breathe fresh life into disadvantaged communities across England. The COVID vaccination programme has been extended to around 500,000 vulnerable children in England. Those aged between 5 and 11 who are most at risk from the virus or live with someone who is immunosuppressed can now get a jab. Wales has already extended its vaccine programme, while parents in Scotland and Northern Ireland are being encouraged to take up the offer for their children. A second storm is set to hit the UK 24 hours after Storm Malik killed 2 people. Yesterday, a 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees during the storm. Amber weather warnings have been issued for Scotland as Storm Corrie hits the northern half of the UK. Winds of up to 90 miles per hour are expected. Meanwhile, thousands of homes in north-east England and Scotland are still without power after the high winds battered the country. Meanwhile, in the US, a number of states have declared emergencies as blizzard conditions and heavy snowfall continues. Up to 60 centimetres of snow has fallen in parts of Boston and New York State, causing power outages and travel chaos. Thousands of flights have been cancelled over the weekend, the majority out of New York, Boston and Philadelphia. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is warning the storm could be life-threatening. North Korea has carried out what appears to be its biggest missile test since 2017. It's understood the weapon was an intermediate-range missile which reached an altitude of 1,200 miles before landing in the Sea of Japan yesterday. The US, Japan and South Korea have all condemned the launch, the 7th test this month. Relatives of the victims of Bloody Sunday have held a remembrance walk in Londonderry to mark its 50th anniversary. It's one of a number of events being held in the city. 13 people were killed when members of the British Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on a civil rights march on the 30th of January in 1972. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Tamsin, thanks very much. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, we'll be discussing the latest UK involvement in the Russian-Ukrainian crisis. What's really happening and why does it matter to us? It's threatening economic sanctions against Russia if it invades. It's providing Ukraine with anti-tank weapons and armoured vehicles. Plus, we'll be taking a look at why we are with the Sue Gray report and where we are with it after Partygate. Senior Tories have joined opposition MPs in demanding the report on number 10 lockdown parties be published in full. This seems to be going on and on and on. And I'm delighted to say that I'll be joined by an OBE and a news legend, dear friend of mine, Natasha Kapinski, a little later on this afternoon. She'll join me to talk about her great work that she does for the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation. And she has a book out. But first, what's really happening in the Ukrainian-Russian crisis? And why does it matter to us? There are 3 leading theories doing the rounds: a Russian invasion and occupation of more of Ukraine, more jaw-jaw diplomacy, as leaders' diaries are certainly bulging with meetings next week, or a mighty reset, which, to all intents and purposes, is a matter of post-Cold War unfinished business. Everyone is talking down war, but with more than 125,000 Russian troops along their border with Ukraine, and even more in Belarus, Russia's ally, the makings are there, with aircraft aplenty and warships on manoeuvres. According to experts, a cyber war is already underway. On jaw-jaw the diplomacy, the United Nations meets on Monday. Boris Johnson is going to talk to President Putin early next week, and his Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary are both going to Moscow. The Americans and the Russians are talking and drafting papers. The problem is that they all know the sticking point, Ukraine's desire to join NATO, probably can't be finessed. Talk of sanctions, exclusion from global financial systems, the blocking of a new gas pipeline and threats to the estimated £70 billion of dirty Russian money in London might work. Putin is essentially a bit of a rogue who's supported by dodgy businessmen and women whose interests he serves and protects. On the last theory, a post-Cold War reset, in the 1960s and 70s, I grew up with RAF V bombers at the bottom of my garden, ready to go at 4 minutes' notice to drop nuclear weapons on Russian soil. It was the Soviet Union in those days. In the late 1980s, I saw Gorbachev come to power, and I reported on his attempts to end the Cold War. I was in Iceland when he and Ronald Reagan made huge strides in nuclear disarmament. Then, in 1989, I reported live on the fall of the Berlin Wall, following Gorbachev's refusal to intervene on behalf of East Germany's Communist Party. I saw the generals try to oust Gorbachev, the advent of Yeltsin, his deals with the oligarchs, to sell off much of Russia's state wealth, to keep him in power and to keep the country going. And I saw his fall, and then the emergence of Vladimir Putin. Now, defeat in the Cold War hurt and humiliated Russia. Soviet Russia's old allies grasped freedom and rushed to join, or tried to join, NATO and the EEC as it was, then the EU. Most succeeded, but Ukraine was a step too far for Putin. Russia's never really accepted Ukraine as a nation. They've always seen it as an adjunct to Mother Russia. They want it, or, as they might say, they want to have it and keep it. As Armed Forces Minister James Heapy said in The Telegraph this morning, Putin wants the countries of the former Warsaw Pact to return to the fold. But Ukraine won't budge, and for Putin, that is the problem. So, where are you putting your money in what the diplomats call this great game? I'm delighted to be joined by former Deputy Prime Minister Damian Green, a Russian exile who used to work in the Kremlin and is now a political analyst, an intelligence analyst, and Sir Christopher Mayer, former UK ambassador to the United States, who also worked in Downing Street. They will offer their views, I will offer mine, but we all want to hear yours as well. So do email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, tweet or go to Facebook, and I will read out the very best. So let's get it underway, live here in the studio with Damian Green, MP, former First Secretary of State and Minister for the Cabinet Office. In your view, Damian, is this Putin seeking to reset that post-Cold War balance?
Yes. I mean, as you've just said, he's never accepted the results of the Cold War, if you like, wants to turn it back. And I think more than a strategist, Putin's an opportunist. And this is, it seems to me, a pretty direct effect of the catastrophic way the West fled from Afghanistan. Because, I mean, you've just done a lot of Cold War history. You can look back in history and see that after the Americans lost in Vietnam, that was when Soviet communism pushed furthest out. There was even an attempt at a communist coup in Portugal in the 1970s. They tried to push further out from Eastern Europe into Western Europe. And I think the same thing's happening now. Putin has decided the West is at a moment of maximum weakness.
Yes.
So, and as you say, it's not just the Russian government. The Russian people think of the Ukrainian people as them, as one of them. The Ukrainians don't, but it's quite deep in the Russian psyche. So yes, this is a move that will be popular in Russia, and so he's trying to overturn the results of the Cold War.
Intrigued by that window of opportunity argument, because many people will say that Biden made an error over Afghanistan and is seen by his critics to be a bit doddery and more worried about China, perhaps. Boris Johnson has his own issues, which we will discuss at the end of the conversation, I'm sure. France and Germany seem to be taking slightly different, nuanced views. I mean, are you troubled that within NATO, which it's all about, there are really quite serious divisions?
Yes, I think this is a very depressing time for people who hold the values of the West dear, because we're in a political situation where, as you say, the American president appears wobbly and followed an American president who was deeply unpredictable, to be as polite as possible about Donald Trump. And also, in other parts of NATO, the Germans in particular, I'm very, very worried about the German stance. they appear hamstrung by history and hamstrung by economics, where they're in this fixation that they are dependent on Russian energy.
And actively seeking to block some people sending troops.
Yeah.
I mean, they've sent helmets, which
Yes.
the Telegraph yesterday took the mickey out of unmercifully. But they just don't want to rub up against Russia because of the gas pipeline and economic relations.
That's right. And I think, oddly enough, one of the levers, we're looking for levers the West has got against Putin at the moment. And if the Germans would say, you know what, we don't trust you, we're not opening Nord Stream 2, that new gas pipeline, that would be quite an effective way of telling Putin, you cannot get away with this. I mean, there are other methods that we all need to contribute to, and the British government is of sending arms to the Ukraine, troops into other parts of Eastern Europe. Because in the end, I mean, it seems to me that Putin's at the point now where he has invested so much in this, so many troops on the border, that if we're going to stop this without a war, he's going to have to get something. And how little we can make that something is the really difficult task facing Western leaders.
A clever double act with Liz Truss and Ben Wallace, the Foreign and Defence Secretaries, respectively, physically going to Moscow next week, because Ben can talk about troops in Estonia, aircraft in Cyprus, F-45 frigates in the Black Sea. Liz can say, if you don't play the game, your money in London, your dirty money, is at risk, and she's bringing forward fresh legislation to toughen that up. Is she playing a blinder?
I think the British government is playing a good, playing, I don't want to call it a game, but playing the situation well. And yes, that Foreign Office legislation will be very welcome. One could argue we should have done this earlier, that actually if London has become a sort of world centre for what you've just described as dirty money, then it shouldn't be. We should want to clear that up anyway. But if there was ever a time to do it, it's now.
Yes, absolutely. On Boris Johnson, he's going to talk to Vladimir Putin on the phone. Do you believe, I mean, you know the guy, you know how these systems work. Is there anything seriously that you think he could say to Putin that would shift it? Or is it simply an act of reminding Putin, A, that Johnson is here, and B, that Johnson's on side?
I think it's an act of saying that, Britain is, I mean, it's not the most important player in NATO, let's be honest, it's the Americans. And Putin will deal with us the way he will deal with Germany or France, the sort of second-rank powers in the NATO alliance. But that makes us important. Yeah. We have military capacity. We absolutely have the capacity to sell modern, up-to-date arms to the Ukrainians. And, in very crude terms, if we sell them those, and we are selling them those, then if he invades, then that means more dead Russian troops he's got to explain away.
You said at the very beginning of the conversation that Putin's sharp enough to spot weaknesses here and there. Do you suspect, fear, applaud the fact that this is being seen in certain quarters as part of Boris Johnson's fight-back campaign to get himself back on track, post-Partygate, post the rest of it?
I don't think it is, actually. I think because it's happening, it is evidently not the wish of the British government that this crisis should be happening at this time. But being in government means you don't only get to do what you plan to do, you have to deal with events. And this is a very, very big event. So I don't think it should be seen in that context.
OK, but then, final question then. The joint article from the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister in the Sunday Times today, despite opposition from people like yourself and many, many others, the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, John Redwood, Robert Halfon, right across the party, that this shouldn't happen, and if it has to happen, not now. That is being judged in many quarters as a profound mistake.
Yeah, you say you've added me to that list of people who oppose it. I didn't oppose it. I would fund social care in a different way. But I absolutely get the point that we've got to get the backlogs in the NHS down. You've got to do it away. National insurance is one way of doing it. So I voted for that. So I don't share that opposition. I don't think it's a profound mistake. I think what is very important is that we need to get back on a track of tax cutting before the next general election. But actually, on that, I very much support the government.
Fascinating stuff. Damian, it's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for coming in to have that conversation on Russia, Ukraine, and matters domestic. Great to see you, and best to everyone at home. Thank you very much indeed. Damian Green there, the former Deputy Prime Minister. And I've got a whole range of other guests coming up. But I said only about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago, let us know what you think. You are exercised already. Andrew began the conversation by tweeting, Putin gets his way or he's going to keep standing on the border. Either an understanding is reached behind the scenes or it's either invasion or an insurrection inside Ukraine. I can't see Biden having the clout to deal with Putin. Putin has the upper hand. The West is weak. Interesting that Damian Green just told me very similar thoughts there at the end. Richard via Twitter, this would be a war where the objectives are not very clear-cut. We're talking about defending a country which used to be a part of Russia being taken back from them. Yet Ukraine is not actually in Europe or in NATO. Richard, that's what it's all about. And finally, Buddy, Putin must know that Russian mothers and fathers will not thank him for sending their sons and daughters to fight a war of conquest and having their children return in body bags or never returning at all. Keep those thoughts coming. Extraordinary. And we will read even more of them out later on. I'm delighted to say that joining me now on the sofa to join in this conversation is Ewan Grant. Now, Ewan's a former intelligence analyst covering ex-Soviet states who's worked in Ukraine and in Central Asia. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for coming in. Is this Putin seeking to reset the post-Cold War settlement?
Or to quote Damian Green a few minutes ago, yes.
And do you agree also, because you're an intelligence analyst and you see these nuances too, do you agree with Damian that Putin clearly sees a weakness within NATO and within a number of its member states, us included?
Very, very much so. So again, the answer is yes. I particularly recommend your listeners and viewers to note his comments about Portugal. He and his people have strong links with Portugal, and particularly Portuguese Africa, and that's very relevant today.
Is he good at foreign affairs? I mean, he's an ex-KGB man, and in that sense, your shadows cross over a little bit. You know how he works. He was a colonel, he was a field operative. But is he good at the big game, the great game, as I described it in my lead-in?
Caveat there, he knows how to exploit it. Whether he really is looking at the long-term picture beyond his lifetime, because, of course, does he want to become eventually in hot to China?
That's another key factor within it. Let me just take you back to the key analysis, though. Again, given your background and experience, and particularly knowledge of these people, if Ukraine's membership of NATO is the sticking point, then do you believe it is capable of being resolved by diplomacy?
Just about. I'd go 60-40 it is. Remember, let's not forget the Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a quiet deal on the side, which of course was never admitted, to withdraw the US missiles from Turkey. That's come up several times.
Yes. Well, Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, refers to it in his article this morning. It is that moment of test.
Yeah, it's a brilliant article, by the way. Straight away, we've got bang, 1, money laundering, bang, 2, cyber, and also forgotten, but very relevant, his mercenaries causing trouble and exploiting Western weakness in Africa and the Middle East.
Is it dangerous for the UK to go from a small number of training servicemen and women and a reasonably large number of anti-tank missiles to 1,800 troops in Estonia, an F-45 warship in the Baltic Sea, and another squadron of fighter jets in Cyprus?
I wouldn't, but well, Estonia, as you know, is in both the EU and NATO. You've got friends in Sweden and Finland looking across at Estonia. I would be more worried about the possibility of a problem with a Gulf of Tonkin incident in the air, which could involve reconnaissance planes from Cyprus, but particularly the Type 45. And I think we need to look very, very carefully. General Hodges, the former head of the American Army in Europe, been warning about this for years. A threat, physical or intimidatory, to Odessa, to cut off Ukraine's economic lifeline. So we might be looking at a Gulf of Tonkin incident at sea. So the Type 45 is the one to watch.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Two final points. You read all of this stuff, I know, and reflect upon it very deeply. Blind spy, indeed. But looking at the relative newcomers, you've got a new Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Radakin, who's only been in the job a couple of weeks. Liz Truss has been there a little longer, but not for a huge amount of time as Foreign Secretary. And Ben Wallace, I think universally, is being judged to be playing a blinder at the moment, and has written very elegantly about it. On that front, are we doing well? Are we being seen to be a key player at home and abroad?
The problem is abroad, not everybody is appreciating it. There's a danger we may overplay our hand. We are playing it very well as long as we make sure we keep allies on side. Not a few of them, particularly those who've been compromised by the dirty money. It's not just an Anglosphere problem, particularly Germany. They need to come on board more.
Sure. And finally, very briefly, to be clear, 60-40. Talk rather than war.
You know, I might put that at 55-45.
Ewan, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your insights and your knowledge and judgment.
Thank you for making it so easy.
That's Ewan Grant. Blind Spy and many other works. Look him up and follow him. That was Ewan Grant, former analyst covering ex-Soviet states who's worked in Ukraine and Central Asia, therefore comes with great authority.
I can assure you I'm not doing it.
You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends off camera. We've lots more coming up on today's programme, including the latest on Partygate. Just what can we expect from Sue Gray's report and what are the problems? But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon in the UK is looking fine for many, but wet and very windy due to Storm Corrie further north. Let's take a look at the details. There should still be some decent sunshine in the southwest this afternoon, though cloud will be starting to build from the west. Temperatures will be around 8 or 9 Celsius. In the southeast, it'll be mostly sunny, though some cloud will develop through the afternoon. Highs of around 7 and 8 Celsius here. Whilst there'll be a few sunny breaks, generally it'll be a cloudier picture across much of Wales with some spots of rain. It'll be a cloudier, windy afternoon for northwest England. Here the rain will start to push in, turning heavier as we go towards the evening. Temperatures under the cloud will be somewhat suppressed. It's looking similar for northeast England, where it'll be mostly cloudy this afternoon. The rain will reach here by the evening. Strengthening winds may lead to some disruption with the risk of gales. It'll be very unsettled across Scotland with very strong winds, especially in the north, where gusts may reach 90 miles per hour. There will also be heavy rain and hill snow. It's also going to be wet and windy across Northern Ireland this afternoon as a band of rain sweeps through. Gales are likely here, especially around the coast. The unsettled weather will sweep across the UK through the evening with the strongest winds in the north, and that's how the weather's looking today. Thank you.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 12 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, it's a story that's rumbled on over the past few weeks, but could be coming to a head very shortly when Sue Gray's report is finally released. But interesting to note, it doesn't appear on one front page. Due to the Met Police investigation, the report is expected to be heavily redacted, gone all over with a big black felt-tip pen. Senior Tories have joined opposition MPs in demanding the report on Number 10 lockdown breaches is published in full. Joining me now to discuss this is a friend of mine, friend of the show, Jerry Hayes. Jerry is a criminal barrister and also a former Conservative Member of Parliament for the noble seat of Harlow, therefore speaks with great authority on both fronts. First of all, Jerry, good to see you. As a lawyer, do you understand the Met's requests over holding back and deleting and redacting?
No. Well, I understand them. They're just completely wrong. I mean, this is another incredible piece of incompetence by Cressida Dick, and I think she should resign eventually as a result of this. And I'll tell you why. Because the Metropolitan Police have got absolutely no statutory or other authority to tell Sue Gray to redact her report. They just haven't got it. Then you've got the Contempt of Court Act. It doesn't apply because there is not a criminal case yet. For there to be a criminal case, there has to be someone who's been arrested or there's a warrant for arrest. So that doesn't apply either. And then secondly, some people are saying, well, it could prejudice the case because of a jury trial. The matters that Sue Gray is looking into are actually offences that can only be dealt with in the magistrates' court. So there's this level of ignorance. And the trouble is, the lazy way of looking at this would be, look, there's been a stitch-up. She's been lent on. And I can see no evidence of this at all. But the public want to know the truth. They expect some redactions by not naming certain people who've perhaps blown the whistle. That's fair enough. But they want the guts of this story. How can you have a report with minimal references to Partygate when that's what it's all about?
Well put. And politically, intriguingly, the blame has now shifted from Boris Johnson to his aides, and as you just echoed and added your name to it, to Cressida Dick and the Met. It may not be a stitch-up, but for Boris Johnson, it's pretty handy.
Well, it's very handy indeed. One thing, and I must say, your personal coverage of the Ukraine is by far the best that I've ever seen. I mean, listening to Ewan Grant today, now he mentioned Portugal. I'd never considered that at all. And he actually slightly hinted that although Great Britain is doing well on this, I suspect when Boris Johnson goes over and blunders in with all front feet and God knows what, there could be problems because he sees this to be on the national stage as a prime minister. Nothing to do with Partygate. I am personally trying to stop Putin and I'm going to give him a phone call. Well, with the way number 10 works, they'll probably get the wrong number. But he seems, you're right, he seems to have escaped. I don't think he will. There's a mood on the backbenches that he's no longer the winner and he's going to lose it and they're going to get rid of him sooner rather than later. But the Gray report, for heaven's sake, she must be tearing her hair out.
All right. Let me drag you back to, I'm going via Portugal, and thank you for that and your lovely comments. But to another crucial point, Rishi Sunak, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, jointly write a piece in the Sunday Times this morning saying that national insurance rise is needed to pay for NHS and ultimately for care. We've had people queuing up on this programme to say, no, cost of living crisis, it's crazy, Tories shouldn't raise taxes. Heck of a gamble.
Well, it's not so much of a gamble because it's not going to work. I think the way to do it, and the various whispers I've heard from number 10, is VAT. That actually you can put £2 billion a year in over a basis, not solve the problem. The other thing you can do, particularly with energy, because energy is the big problem, and it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse, is the cap. Well, the cap doesn't help everybody, because I'm told that it doesn't have a cap on wholesale. So all sorts of little businesses are going bust, little energy companies are going bust. In the North Sea, billions are being made. Now, we ought to do something about that. So I actually can understand where Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are going, but of course he wants to grab his Sunak is his life jacket, because Sunak has been saying, well, these are his tax cuts. Boris Johnson's tax rises.
Rises, yeah.
Yes.
Derry,
I mean, absolutely appalling.
All right, on that calm note and measured judgment, we will leave it and move on. And you're always welcome here, Jerry. Keep in touch and have a great Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Jerry Hayes there, criminal barrister and former Conservative Member of Parliament. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends, and we've plenty more of them still to come this afternoon, including I'll be chatting to my very dear friend, journalist and presenter Natasha Kapinski here on GB News, and I can tell you, I can't wait. But first, let's bring you right up to date with all of the news. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Alistair, thank you. It's 12:33 in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says the picture on Ukraine's border is increasingly concerning as he urges Russia to avoid a reckless and catastrophic invasion. The Prime Minister is believed to be considering doubling the number of troops deployed to strengthen Europe's borders. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss confirmed Britain will publish new legislation this week to broaden the scope of sanctions that can be applied to Moscow. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have insisted the planned rise in national insurance, set for April, is the right thing to do. That's despite opposition parties and some Conservative MPs saying it should be halted due to fears of the increase to the cost of living. A second storm is set to hit the UK 24 hours after Storm Malik killed 2 people. Amber weather warnings have been issued for Scotland as Storm Corrie hits the northern half of the UK, where winds of up to 90 miles per hour are expected. Yesterday, a 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees. The COVID vaccination programme has been extended to around 500,000 vulnerable children in England. Those aged between 5 and 11 who are most at risk from the virus or who live with someone who is immunosuppressed can now get a jab. Relatives of the victims of Bloody Sunday have held a remembrance walk in Londonderry to mark its 50th anniversary. It's one of a number of events being held in the city. 13 people were killed when members of the British Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on a civil rights march on the 30th of January in 1972. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. After the break, it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton, join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It is 23 minutes to 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News. Now, the clue is in the name of the show. I really enjoy chatting to friends of mine, old and new. But my next guest is a very old friend, a titan of news broadcasting who's delivered the news from many networks here in the United Kingdom. She's also a member of the Prime Minister's Holocaust Commission. Natasha Kapinski joins me live now from her home in Sussex. Hello, you.
Oh, how lovely to see you, Al. Next time I want to be sitting next to you on the sofa, please.
That's an absolute promise. I'm delighted. You've known for a couple of days that I really wanted to have this conversation, and we both go into totally serious mode about it because last Thursday was Holocaust Memorial Day, and it's a profoundly personal mission for you, isn't it?
It certainly is. And that came about, actually, Elle, after you and I stopped working together. I was the subject of one of the BBC's amazing programmes, Who Do You Think You Are?, where I discovered that many members of my father's family were murdered by the Nazis in Belarus. It was an extraordinary experience. I mean, absolutely traumatic beyond belief, but also to have a television camera as you discover all this about your family. But as a consequence of that, about a year after that programme was broadcast in 2014, when David Cameron was Prime Minister, I was invited to be part of a new Holocaust Commission that he was establishing, essentially trying to work out what this country needs to do better to memorialise one of the darkest hours in history. And that ended up with me volunteering as the only journalist on the board to interview 112 Holocaust survivors who had never before shared their extraordinary experience. And it was honestly one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but also the greatest honour.
Yeah, I'll come to the detail of that in a moment, but I want to take you back to the brilliant programme, Who Do You Think You Are? And it had a similar impact on our mutual friend, Rob Rinder. Stephen Fry was aghast and said, you know, I might not have been here had my grandfather not fled and been helped out. Your dad's a lovely guy, and I so admired him. Did he not talk about it? Did he not know about it?
Yes, he did to a degree, but I think it's a fairly it's fairly standard that those that are involved in it generally try to hide the trauma from their families as a way of protecting them and facilitating growth and moving forwards. And towards the end of people's lives who are involved in the Holocaust, certainly the survivors that I met, there was this almost panic that, you know, that they suddenly realized that they didn't have long left on this earth, and they really wanted something positive to have come out of such a hugely horrific experience for them. And many of the survivors I spoke to said it was the last thing they wanted to do before they died, and a number of them went on to die very soon after the interviews. And what's so sad is, you know, every year that passes, fewer and fewer of them are still alive to tell their tale. And so that's why it felt so important to, you know, conduct those interviews. It took 15 months. It was hugely traumatic for everybody involved, but it feels like a very important piece of history to have documented.
Absolutely. And what I find extraordinary as well is that, like those extraordinary gentlemen who lived through the First World War, sadly none with us now, such was the horror of it, and being in a concentration camp even worse, they themselves didn't want to talk about it. It took someone like you, very good, but also crucially empathetic, to just sit calmly down with these people who'd seen the worst of humanity and just talk gently about it. That takes a real skill, Tash.
Thank you very much for saying that, Al. I mean, the chief rabbi at the time said it was a sacred task, and it genuinely felt like it was. Each interview took at least 5 hours. Family members were invited to accompany the survivor. Very often they were listening to their stories for the very first time as well. There was a huge amount of preparation, but also a lot of aftercare, because talking about the stories that they shared clearly was very traumatic for them. And so it was a huge responsibility. And I hope that we handled it as best we could. There was a lot of tears, and not just from them, but from me. I mean, I've never cried so much. It was just such an onslaught of horror to imagine that humanity is capable of such suffering and cruelty. It was a huge life lesson. But what the survivors are determined to do, and I hope that I'm helping to help with this sense of peace as they pass out of this world, is that we do have to learn from that period in history, and we do have to try and work together to make sure it never is repeated.
People have written a great deal, and the lovely Hugo Rifkin wrote an amazing piece that he put onto Twitter about family connections, and there are great biographies, and there are even films like Schindler's List. But what you did is what academics call the oral history. It is the actual words of the human beings, the men and women themselves. And that's a unique contribution that will, I hope, be cherished in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. Did you feel that sense of responsibility when you were doing it?
Absolutely huge. I felt a huge sense of responsibility, that primarily actually to the survivor, to make sure that I handled it as best I could. But actually, as you know, Alistair, this is only part of what the UK government have been doing and continue to do to memorialise that part of history. The oral history was part of a bigger project, which of course, hopefully will end up in a learning centre and memorial right next to the House of Parliament. We've been granted planning permission. So far, the government have committed £75 million to this project, with further many millions needing to be fundraised. But this hopefully will be the focal point of commemoration in this country. It will be a world-class facility. The planning has been granted. We're going through a small process of judicial review at the moment, and let's hope very soon the first spade will be in the ground, and that in time we'll be able to welcome visitors from around the world to a really special memorial and learning centre, and that's where the Holocaust interviews that I conducted will be housed.
Extraordinary. The Echo Eternal charity festival on Wednesday night was a pretty powerful thing. Before we talk about it, I think we've got a clip. Have we got it? Yes, we have. Let's just play a little bit of this for the folk at home so they know what we're talking about.
We are the voices of the voiceless. We are the voices of the voiceless. We are the voices of the voiceless.
They live with us, through us.
I was prisoner 8,431.
The trains arrived, and then, without any notice, they got all the women and they rushed them straight away back into the trains. Couldn't even say goodbye to anybody.
So those spoken words, but also what struck me as being so powerful about that was it used other art forms, spoken word, music, lighting, and then the contributions from the actual interviews, and young people right at the heart of it.
So it's wonderful that you showed a clip of Harry Ulmer, one of the survivors. I was lucky enough on Wednesday to be sitting next to Harry, and he is in his 90s, and he was there to witness the performance that we were there to see in Birmingham. So Echo Eternal is a really beautiful project that's come out of the survivor testimony. It's a commemorative arts, media and civic engagement project which is delivered through schools, bringing diverse communities together, helping to create a harmony and amongst other things, combating hate crime. It's a project that started off in Birmingham and it's been delivered in Liverpool, and a Dulwich school took part this year as well. Liverpool, as I said, Lipper. It's a beautiful project which really helps the younger generation to echo eternally the horrors of that period. And we're hoping that it's going to travel through all the schools in the country eventually. We've got big ambitions for Echo Eternal.
Wish it well. Just a profoundly important and good project. I was also thinking, I remember chatting to your dad as well. I mean, your family has been through it. He's a brilliant economist and was hounded out of South Africa, having seen the horrors of apartheid, which he stood against. I mean, not once but twice have such horrific things befallen your family.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? We were just talking about Echo Eternal, but that's a family echo, isn't it? But maybe that's made us all committed to make sure that the world is slightly better when we leave than now we're here. I mean, I think there are so many amazing projects going on. But again, through Who Do You Think You Are? My father's a very, very modest man. But it was wonderful to be able to discover a bit more about his own personal heroism in South Africa and the sacrifices that he and many of his friends and colleagues made to try and make South Africa a more equal place. It's certainly given me a real sense of determination and responsibility to continue a little bit of his fight because yes, he is a titan himself.
A damn fine economist as well, but that's a separate issue. You also are very much a family person, and we've had the honour of knowing that a little bit. But the book that your two children came up with, I just think is absolutely... The only other person I know who's done something similar to it is Ronnie Wood of the Great Rolling Stones, who did readings for people suffering during lockdown. There's the picture of it. For folk at home listening on radio, it's called Letters from Lockdown, Famous Faces, Frontline Workers, Stay-at-Home Heroes. Natasha, it was not your idea, it was your children's idea, but my God, you got some people to take part in it.
Well, do you know what? So this is a project in lockdown. We decided, I've always written lots of letters. Hopefully, Alistair, you've received many of my letters, but I love writing letters. And so it's rubbed off on the children. In lockdown, we wrote to people every single day, starting off with friends and family. You know, how are you? We're lonely. Are you lonely? You know, what are you doing with your time? And then we just upped the game and we just wrote to everybody. And like you, Al, I've done lots of favours in my life to lots of different people. So I called in a few favours and we've had some amazing responses. I'm president of Barnardo's, so all the proceeds, the publisher profits of the book go to Barnardo's, and it's a gorgeous collection of lockdown experiences from the likes of Ed Sheeran to Bill Gates, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, I mean, loads of people. But the children didn't always know who they were writing to when I said that.
Paul McCartney was another. No, you don't have to trouble. My children meet top show jumpers, and when they were little ones, they didn't know who they were. They certainly do now. You mentioned Barnardo's. You're also a Save the Children ambassador. For both of you, it's kids, isn't it?
Always. I mean, it's the biggest pleasure. It wasn't easy having children. I struggled like lots of women to have kids. And so when I eventually got them, and you were a very kind friend supporting me through that struggle, but when I eventually got my children, I mean, my word, they were the most precious thing, like every parent knows. But yes, I mean, I'm labelled by them as being very, what do they call me? OP, overprotective. But too bad. I love them so much. But yes, you find us in the countryside today. We live on a farm in Sussex. I keep saying that all the animals that I bring into the farm are really for the children, but the truth is they're really for me.
Well, I was going to say, we've nearly done in terms of time, but I did boast at the beginning that we've been friends for a very, very long time, and we certainly have that love of our children very much in common, but we're also utterly stupid and crazy about animals. The only one I've ever fallen out with you over is I'm pro-horse, you're pro-alpaca.
Oh yes, I'm a complete alpaca lover. Oh gosh, that's little Doodle. In fact, this is Millie the alpaca, and yes, they've all got crazy names ranging from the Duke of Sheffield to Lady Lila. We've even got, Alistair, Oh, there we go. Highland Cow. This is Mabel. I don't know. I'm slightly frightened of horses. I'm in full respect of them. But yes, Mabel is, I find, a little bit easier to deal with. And that's my next job. After speaking to you, I'm going out to give Mabel some carrots.
There's no better way to spend a Sunday afternoon than A, talking to Natasha Kapinski, and then B, imagining her lovely husband and her two lovely little ones going out to feed an array of creatures. Natasha, back into serious mode. Thank you for what you did for the Holocaust Memorial work, and I really do hope that project where we can have a centre for study and reflection. I think one of the most important things I did with our kids was to take them to the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, just let them take it in and make their own minds up. But hearing those stories, truly important. We've done. Love to you and the whole family, and thank you so much for what you've done, and thanks for your time.
Alistair, I can't wait to see you. Please, I want to see you very soon. Lots of love to you. Thank you.
Take care. There we go. Natasha Kapinski, broadcaster, member of the Prime Minister's Holocaust Commission, mum and keeper of alpacas. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more still to come on the programme this afternoon, including a look back at the Bloody Sunday tragedy, which was 50 years ago today. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking fine for many, but wet and very windy due to Storm Corrie further north. Let's take a look at the details. There should still be some decent sunshine in the southwest this afternoon, though cloud will be starting to build from the west. Temperatures will be around 8 or 9 Celsius. In the southeast, it'll be mostly sunny, though some cloud will develop through the afternoon. Highs of around 7 and 8 Celsius here. Whilst there'll be a few sunny breaks, generally it'll be a cloudier picture across much of Wales with some spots of rain. It'll be a cloudier, windy afternoon for northwest England. Here, the rain will start to push in, turning heavier as we go towards the evening. Temperatures under the cloud will be somewhat suppressed. It's looking similar for northeast England, where it'll be mostly cloudy this afternoon. The rain will reach here by the evening. Strengthening winds may lead to some disruption with the risk of gales. It'll be very unsettled across Scotland with very strong winds, especially in the north, where gusts may reach 90 miles per hour. There will also be heavy rain and hill snow. It's also going to be wet and windy across Northern Ireland this afternoon as a band of rain sweeps through. Gales are likely here, especially around the coast. The unsettled weather will sweep across the UK through the evening with the strongest winds in the north, and that's how the weather's looking today.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. We're heading up towards 1 o'clock and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News. On this day in 1972, the world was deeply shocked at the news of the Boggside Massacre. In Derry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland, 31 unarmed civilians were shot by British soldiers who'd gathered for a civil rights march. Well, today marks the 50th anniversary of the tragedy, which is considered as one of the defining moments during the Troubles. Boris Johnson's taken to Twitter to say, we must learn from the past, reconcile and build a peaceful future for the people of Northern Ireland. Joining me now is Professor Marianne Elliott, Professor at the Institute of Irish Studies in the University of Liverpool. Marianne, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
As an academic, not a politician, put it in historic context for us.
OK, this day 50 years ago, it was a very volatile time in Northern Ireland, but it was at a time when things could have been changed. We weren't yet doomed to spend, the next, 28 years or so in the Troubles. There were some disastrous decisions, security and political decisions made at the time. Internment in August 1971 and the civil rights march that took place on Bloody Sunday was an anti-internment march. Some 20,000 people joined it that day. As you have already alerted us, 13 people were shot that day and many more were injured. Nearly half of those shot were only 17. They were teenagers. And the families suffered the terrible indignity of a cover-up, a whitewash afterwards, which hung over them until 2010. And at the time, and I was a student at the time, and I remember it, we weren't sure. A lot of us kind of believed what the lies that were being put out. It was said, that the troops were fired on first, that these were IRA, they'd shot. And that was all nonsense. The Savile inquiry, which was set up by Tony Blair as part of the Good Friday Agreement, the peace process, then finally reported in 2010, and a remarkable parliamentary declaration by David Cameron happened, and he's been on the news media a lot this weekend.
He has. Marianne, let me come in on that point, because in fact I was in Derry, Londonderry, when David Cameron made that public apology on the publication of the Savile report. But a lot of people listening to the conversation, whatever their sympathies are on either side of the argument, might make the point that should have drawn a line totally to the affair. But the families of some of those who died are still pressing for action against the soldiers, which the government will not concede. Should they not now accept that it was a horror, but it's over?
Before we go on to that, could I just say to you that it was a disastrous turning point in the Troubles. We really must not forget that. The Provisional IRA were just emerging. They were not strong. The shootings on Bloody Sunday was a major home goal for Britain and indeed Stormont, and Stormont fell after it. It tarnished British reputation internationally. It recruited for the IRA at a time when peace would have been possible, and we must not forget that, and we mustn't forget.
Marianne, I wasn't at all seeking to undermine what you'd said in that first crisp analysis. I was merely saying, and it has to be my final question, I'm afraid, is it not now time to not only embrace Savile and Cameron's apology, but to say that now is it? Move forward.
Well, most of the families have been very honourable and are happy to do that. There still is a terrible political controversy going on in that the current government wants to bring in an amnesty for everybody, and every single political party in Northern Ireland, including all the unionists, oppose that. Because you must remember that if you lose loved ones in controversial circumstances, you're not. I mean, my understanding from the families at the moment is they're not seeking bitter revenge. They would just like to know exactly what happened.
Marianne, on that profound statement, they just want to know what really happened. We have to leave it, but I'm grateful for your time and thank you for breaking into your Sunday afternoon to talk to us. A real pleasure. Professor Marianne Elliott there, Professor of the Institute of Irish Studies at the University of Liverpool. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Just gone 2 minutes past 1. We have plenty more still to come, so do please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Welcome back if you've been with us since noon. Hello if you're just joining us for the last hour. We've plenty more still to come, including more on our discussion, the unfolding situation in Russia and the Ukraine. Is there simply unfinished business for Putin? We'll be hearing what you think, and you'll also have my take. But first, let's bring you right up to date with the latest news at 3 minutes past 1. Here's Tamsin Roberts.
Thank you, Alistair. It's 3 minutes past 1 in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says the picture on Ukraine's border is increasingly concerning as he's urging Russia to avoid a reckless and catastrophic invasion. The Prime Minister's comments come as he considers doubling the number of troops deployed to strengthen Europe's borders. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says a situation in which British soldiers would fight alongside Ukraine's against Russia is very unlikely. Conservative MP Damian Green spoke to GB News earlier and says the government is handling the situation well.
This is, it seems to me, a pretty direct effect of the catastrophic way the West fled from Afghanistan. I think the British government is playing a good, playing, I don't want to call it a game, but playing the situation well. And yes, that Foreign Office legislation will be very welcome. One could argue we should have done this earlier.
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have insisted the planned rise in national insurance set for April is the right thing to do. That's despite opposition parties and some Conservative MPs saying it should be halted over the increase to the cost of living faced by the nation. Writing in the Sunday Times, Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have insisted the 1.25% national insurance rise will help clear NHS backlog. Andrew Rossendale, Conservative MP for Romford, believes raising taxes isn't the answer.
Not what the people want. They don't want taxes to rise, but I also understand the government have to balance the books, and we have a huge black hole. After the pandemic, the government have spent way too much, far too much than we can really afford. We are in the biggest national debt we've ever had. So I do understand why they're bringing this in, though I don't personally think it's right.
The government says Wolverhampton and Sheffield will be the first of 20 disadvantaged areas to gain access to a £1.5 billion fund. As part of levelling up plans, the money will be used to develop new neighbourhoods on derelict or disused land. But Lisa Nandy, Labour's shadow levelling up secretary, accused the government of handing out rehashed pots of money and policies. Ministers say the new plans will breathe fresh life into disadvantaged communities across England. The COVID vaccination programme has been extended to around 500,000 vulnerable children in England. Those aged between 5 and 11 who are most at risk from the virus or live with someone who is immunosuppressed can now get a jab. Wales has already extended its vaccine programme, while parents in Scotland and Northern Ireland are being encouraged to take up the offer for their children. A second storm is set to hit the UK 24 hours after Storm Malik killed 2 people. Yesterday, a 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees during Storm Malik. Amber weather warnings have been issued for Scotland as Storm Corrie hits the northern half of the UK. Winds of up to 90 miles per hour are expected. Meanwhile, thousands of homes in northeast England and Scotland are still without power after the high winds battered the country. Meanwhile, in the US, a number of states have declared emergencies as blizzard conditions and heavy snowfall continues. Up to 60 centimetres of snow has fallen in parts of Boston and New York State, causing power outages and travel chaos. Thousands of flights have been cancelled over the weekend, the majority out of New York, Boston and Philadelphia. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is warning the storm could be life-threatening. North Korea has carried out what appears to be its biggest missile test since 2017. It's understood the weapon was an intermediate-range missile, which reached an altitude of 1,200 miles before landing in the Sea of Japan yesterday. The US, Japan and South Korea have all condemned the launch, the 7th test this month. Relatives of the victims of Bloody Sunday have held a remembrance walk in Londonderry to mark its 50th anniversary. It's one of a number of events being held in the city. 13 people were killed when members of the British Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on a civil rights march on the 30th of January 1972. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get right back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Thanks, Tamsin. I am Alastair Stewart, and until 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come this afternoon on the programme, we will be discussing what's really happening on the Russian-Ukrainian border and why it matters to us. Britain is said to be providing Ukraine with anti-tank weapons and armoured vehicles. We're also coming to Ukraine's aid by threatening economic sanctions against Russia if it invades. Well, I'll give you my take on the situation a little later, along with hearing what you have to say. Plus, on our Rural Spotlight segment, we'll be looking at the aftermath of Storm Arwen, not the ones that were just in the news. Arwen was last year. Caused widespread damage to forestry, particularly across northeast and southern Scotland. It's feared that the effects will be felt for many months to come. And we'll be checking in with this week's rising star. 29-year-old Andrea Valz is an actress, writer and comedian who is using social media very creatively to showcase her work. Now, do get your voice heard by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk and do put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. So, first of all, back to our top discussion now about the ongoing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. The UK is considering offering to double its number of troops deployed in Eastern Europe, particularly in Estonia, with the ongoing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said the possible deployment would send a clear message to the Kremlin. Boris Johnson's expected to phone President Putin in the coming days, and the Defence Secretary and Foreign Secretary are both heading for Moscow in the next few days as well. I am delighted now to be joined in the studio by Valeri Morozov, who is a political analyst, a Russian exile, but crucially has previously worked in the Kremlin. Valeri, very good of you to come in. Thank you so much. First and foremost, you know this history intimately. Is this President Putin trying to reset the post-Cold War settlement?
I would not look at the situation from this angle. I think that what is important to understand is that the process which has started during the Soviet times, this process is still going on. Everybody thinks that Soviet Union collapsed and, these are different times. Nothing like this. What has started there is still going on, and it will go for some time.
But for the bulk of those countries, and I said in my introduction, I reported on a lot of it going back to the emergence of Gorbachev via the fall of the Berlin Wall. The bulk of those former members of the Warsaw Pact and Comecon have, as it were, gone over to the other side. Belarus and Ukraine are standouts. But are you saying significantly there that Russia has never really accepted, whether it's the Soviet Union or modern Russia, that Ukraine is a standalone country with its own rights?
I would say like this, that because I was present there, I knew the people who were involved. And actually, maybe to some extent, I was involved in this in 1980s. The collapse of the Soviet Union was generated by Russia. No other republic was ready or thinking even about it. And nobody expected that it would come to the situation like this.
Sure.
Actually, it started after the Second World War. And you should remember, I already once told about that it's not being paid attention, that in 1947 there was a criminal case. Stalin was taking it himself, controlling the situation and the investigation. And the case was called Leningrad case or the Russian case.
Yeah.
And the case was, and the people who were involved, it was number 2 in the party, Kuznetsov, who's presiding over the meeting of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. And he was, before this, he was one of the leaders in Leningrad during the siege, German occupation.
Only because of time, I want to drag you.
No.
But so right now we are where we are in the sense that the Soviet Union is now gone. But I totally accept that there are seeds of various previous disagreements still there growing.
No, there was.
But you are on record as saying that you do not think that Putin has any plans, intentions to invade. Why 127,000 troops along the border and another small army in Belarus? I don't understand how it's sustainable not to say that the threat is there.
First, one point. The thing is that Russia wanted them to be, to some extent, independent. It means that Russia does not want to be responsible for political development, for economic problems and all these things, because Russia for all these years, was a donor of these republics. So they didn't want. So now coming to the present situation, when you speak about the 100,000 or whatever, you and the Western media include the Russian troops in Crimea. They have nothing to do with the border. And these are approximately 30,000. These are Navy and Marines. And they are to be...
There are 5 times more troops, some of which came from the very delicate eastern borders as well. 5 times more troops there right now than there were last month. You know that as well as I do.
But...
That's not just a sort of slip up in the Ministry of Defense.
But if it is even 100,000 calculated, the length of the border of Russia and Ukraine is 2,500 kilometers. It is from London to Moscow. Plus, it is calculated the border of Belarus. It is 1,100 or 1,200 kilometers. It is approximately from Moscow to Berlin. And on all those territories, you calculate 100,000. But actually, 30,000 are in Crimea, and then you have to take the border, sea border. It is also 1,000 kilometers. Then in the depth, the soldiers are calculated, the number of soldiers, 400 kilometers. So that means it is approximately 10 soldiers per 1 kilometer of the border and 400 square kilometers in depth.
The conclusion from that, Valeri, is so it's defensive on Russia's part.
No, it is not a defense.
Because
NATO
isn't threatening anybody.
No, wait a minute. We'll not speak about NATO. We may speak about later. But regarding, the point is that modern weapons, which have been developed in Russia, give opportunity for Russia, say, for example, in case of provocation from the Ukraine, attack on the separatist border on the separatist republics, to destroy within 5-7 minutes all communication, all control centers, all communication and all commanding centers in Ukraine of the army or state within 5-7 minutes. And Ukraine has no protection. And, to invade with people, with throwing soldiers in the territory of Ukraine, there is no reason even.
All right, final question, and only because time is against us, because I could talk to you for an hour about this. Do you believe that there is a deal that can be done over Ukraine's aspiration to be in NATO that is both satisfactory in London and Washington and in Moscow?
It is very easy to be done. Just fulfill Minsk agreements, because the Minsk agreements, they already protect Russia from the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. But one thing, the problem here, and nobody speaks about it, is not Ukraine. Ukraine is a pretext. Actually, the fighting now, a struggle of all this information campaign and political campaign, is going about Europe, about Western Europe. Because the processes which Russia considers Ukraine, as Lavrov, Minister of Russia, Foreign Minister, said, ownless land. There is no owner. In Russian, it is хозяин, it means master.
Yeah.
The master is used by the Kremlin guards to call the ruler in Kremlin. You should keep in mind. So the thing is that Russia and China think that Europe becomes ownerless.
All right. I'm afraid we have to leave it there, but you mentioned China in passing there at the end. I'm going to book you again because we'll move on from that point to discuss it again later on. Valeri, a pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for coming in and sharing your thoughts on what's going on that border. Thank you very much indeed. Valeri Morozov there with the inside view of what the thinking might be in the Ukraine. Now, you have been getting in touch on our big topic of the day as well, Ukraine and Russia, and I've got a few up here. David says, I find the whole situation extremely worrying. If Putin is trying to annex sovereign states, there is only one outcome. Putin's ambitions have to be reined in through diplomatic means if possible. Well, Valeri just said that might be a runner. That's the view from someone who used to work in the Ukraine. We have another now from Paul. This whole Ukraine border issue is being stirred up by the media. Oh, well. Russia are defending their borders as they don't want the West putting nuclear weapons in the Ukraine. I'm sure we'd be upset if France put weapons pointing to the UK in Calais. I think that's slightly missing the point about the nuances of NATO, but there we are. It was offered up, so we read it out. More to come before we finish. It's 18 minutes past 1. You're watching Alastair Stewart here on GB News TV and Radio. And it is that time of week once again for our Rising Star segment, where we celebrate the very best that this country has to offer. From an early career in children's television to performing comedy via social media, this young lady is one to watch in the world of acting and comedy. And I'm delighted to be joined live in the studio by Andrea Valz. And here she is. Hello, you.
Hello.
Welcome. Take me back to kids' TV first. So how did that start? What were you doing?
So I finished drama school and I had a few years
Which drama school?
I went to East 15 acting school.
Excellent.
Yeah. Loads of fun there. But I had a few years of not a lot, and I was sort of just twiddling my thumbs thinking, it's all right, something's going to come. And something amazing did. It was a wonderful show for CBeebies. It's called Waffle the Wonder Dog, about a talking dog. And I play a mum, and I was 23 when I got the job, and I thought, oh, God, should I be really upset about this, that someone wants to, make me play a mum? That's fine. Mums come in all ages, I suppose. And,
but it's an intriguing point, though, because I was at Bristol University, and just up the road was the brilliant Bristol Vic Theatre School.
Yeah, great.
So I have a genuine interest in these matters.
Yeah.
And so bright young woman wishes to go to drama school rather than university and become a biochemist, something like that. But then you face a real decision, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be an actress or do you want to be a presenter?
Right.
I mean, you are naturally a presenter. We've only met briefly, but you have acting in you as well. That comes across too.
Definitely, yes. I've never really considered presenting, I guess, as a job, but I have actually played a anchorwoman. It was my favourite job ever because I didn't have to learn any lines. It was still all written there. So definitely my favourite job. But yeah, acting was something that I've actually always been really passionate about. And I knew that that's what I wanted to go into.
And there's also another fork in the road, although some do it utterly brilliantly, they can do both. And that is kind of, the serious Juve lead and comic.
Sure.
And you do both, but you prefer comedy.
I think when I was at drama school, I definitely thought I was, I'm going to go off and have like a brilliantly serious career, like I think any actress thinks when they go to drama school. And then I realised when I was at drama school that doing the funnier roles was really where I felt more comfortable. And I was always definitely in my element making people laugh. And so when I left drama school, the jobs just kept coming, and it was the comedy roles, and I loved it. So yeah, that's what I went for.
And very much think about being comfortable in your own skin.
Yes,
what you know deep down.
Maybe it's that being in my own skin, but also just being absurd people, and so that's actually maybe quite far away from who I am.
Yeah.
And there's a comfort in that it's not just you.
The other thing that's changed, and when I knew men and women who were close friends of mine at Bristol Vic all those years ago, social media didn't exist, period. As you were deciding where to go and what to do, it was growing, and it's now taken over the entire world. At what point did you say, hang on a minute, here's an opportunity for me? I know that a lot of musicians do it and record beautiful music in their basements and promote it on social media. But you chose to do your acting, writing and comedy work via social media.
Definitely. It was in those years after drama school and before I landed a big job that I was I was thinking I really need to flex this muscle again. I need to be creative and I need to do something for myself. And so I started using YouTube, and I would just film myself doing sketches on YouTube. That then progressed onto Instagram, which is now probably the platform that I use most. It was just a chance for me to do my own stuff.
Interestingly, is Instagram even bigger for that sort of thing than say, Facebook or Twitter?
I think Twitter absolutely is amazing platform for comedians who write their material, actually written down, but also comedians that put out videos. They can go absolutely viral on Twitter. For me, it's just where I feel most comfortable to post my work. And there is a huge community of comedians out there making amazing
And it's a
content.
two-way street.
Yeah, definitely.
Finally, tell me a bit more about Cheaters.
Cheaters is a new show. It's coming up on BBC One, and it's actually starting on Tuesday the 8th at 10 to 10. It's a great show about the tribulations of being in a young relationship, I guess, and, people cheat. I don't want to give too much away.
No, you mustn't.
Great.
No. but it's funny. Phil Redman, who did Brookside, and also, more importantly, I think, did a thing called Going Out, which is about young people and how they plotted their lives. Some of that work is now coming back, which is great. So you make sure you keep the scripts and you make sure you keep the dates. When is it coming up?
Tuesday the 8th at 10 to 10 on BBC One.
Well, I shall make a point of noting that down and keep the social media going.
Thank you.
But the whole point of this segment is to celebrate bright people who've come up with a good idea as well as having talent. And goodness me, you've ticked all the boxes. Andrea, real pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much.
And I wish you well. And come back and see us anytime.
Oh,
You're most welcome.
Take you off on that.
Thank you very much indeed. Andrea Valz there, Valz, actor, writer, comedian, and coming up shortly in Cheaters. And we've got plenty more coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends after the break. Remember when we were hit by Storm Arwen last November? Well, some rural areas are still struggling with the aftermath from the damage caused, whatever's happening right now with the other storms. But first, let's take a look how useful the link is at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, in the UK is looking fine for many, but wet and very windy due to Storm Corrie further north. Let's take a look at the details. There should still be some decent sunshine in the southwest this afternoon, though cloud will be starting to build from the west. Temperatures will be around 8 or 9 Celsius. In the southeast, it'll be mostly sunny, though some cloud will develop through the afternoon. Highs of around 7 and 8 Celsius here. Whilst there'll be a few sunny breaks, generally it'll be a cloudier picture across much of Wales with some spots of rain. It'll be a cloudier, windy afternoon for northwest England. Here the rain will start to push in, turning heavier as we go towards the evening. Temperatures under the cloud will be somewhat suppressed. It's looking similar for northeast England, where it'll be mostly cloudy this afternoon. The rain will reach here by the evening. Strengthening winds may lead to some disruption with the risk of gales. It'll be very unsettled across Scotland with very strong winds, especially in the north, where gusts may reach 90 miles per hour. There will also be heavy rain and hill snow. It's also going to be wet and windy across Northern Ireland this afternoon as a band of rain sweeps through. Gales are likely here, especially around the coast. The unsettled weather will sweep across the UK through the evening with the strongest winds in the north. And that's how the weather's looking today.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 27 minutes past 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News TV and radio. Now, for those who live in towns and cities, it can be easy to lose touch with what's going on in the countryside and the world of farming and agriculture. So each week we check in with those at the forefront of our rural communities. But given what's happening out there right now, I think you are all aware of Storm Malik, which is causing destruction across the United Kingdom. And there's also Storm Corrie on its way. But some out there are still trying to tackle the clear-up after Storm Arwen, with trees that have been cast aside as debris wreaking havoc. It led us to ask the question, what's being done to tackle that issue? And I'm delighted to be joined now by the president of the Country Land and Business Association, Mark Tufnell, who's there in the middle of your screen, and on the right, Bruce Jobson, who's an agriculture journalist who's witnessed the ongoing effect that this is all happening on people in the north. Let me start, if I may, with Mark. This is extraordinary because the two current storms are already over the news, but as it were, Arwen is still a work in progress. Why?
It's still work in progress because there's so much timber left to take away. It's unbelievable how many trees fell down. They've been snapped in half. We need machines in there. It's jobs that you cannot just tackle with a chainsaw. And it's the extra equipment that's needed and the labour that's required. The contractors are overstretched and overworked, and it's going to take a long time for my members to be back to normal. Could even take up to 3 years.
Bruce, if I can bring you in as a journalist, is it one of those things then where the government, as it were, and the authorities, they'll do the numbers and they know that these things happen occasionally, but they don't happen every week, and therefore perhaps don't give it the sort of priority that Mark is just suggesting there that it should be given?
Mark's absolutely right, and thank you for inviting me on your programme, Alistair. As Mark said, some of these trees, for example, we went out filming with Rachel Sweeney, and one of the farms we went to, there was 200 acres of trees flattened. Now, I've been travelling since Arwen, and from the tree perspective, some of these plantations are inaccessible. You won't be able to get to them using machines. Some of these plantations that I've visited will just be down and they'll remain environmentally like that. They may plant some new trees, but talking about massive trees. And, you know, we were down for 18 days across Northumberland. We've just had Barra, and then last night we've just had Malik. And with Malik, Jamie Wood, who we visited, and Helen Spark, another friend, told me this morning, they've been down since 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. So we've still got massive power outages, and trees were all over the place yesterday. So it's an ongoing problem that I don't think the government can do the figures. Mark said 3 years. I think this is going to go on for decades because of the sheer number of trees.
Let me come back to you on that point, Mark, because I play devil's advocate. In a sense, if you're fortunate enough to be a landowner, whether it is because you've got lovely rural land or whether you're a professional farmer, as Bruce just described with those forestry pictures there, it's down to you. It's your property, it's your land. you've got to prepare yourself for what is likely to happen a couple of times a year. It's not the government's problem.
No, I think our members accept that, but there's all sorts of things that come in the way. There are felling licenses that need to be applied for and processed, and we've asked government to speed that up. We'd asked for equipment to help with the clear up, and a fund was available, but it's just now been closed. And we've also asked for help from the Forestry Commission to help in replanting. But if you go forward, the other thing that we've asked for is for Northern Power Grid to spend a considerable amount of money on actual maintenance. It's something that they've omitted to do. It's not clear from their accounts as to how much they spend. And when you think of the problems caused with lack of water, because Northwest Water were not able to run their generators because they didn't have any electricity, we found that our members didn't have water supplies.
Absolutely. And also, and I've seen examples of it elsewhere, refrigeration and the mechanical stuff that's required to run a farm properly. Final thought, if I may, from Bruce, and again, I'm just reminding folk that you're a journalist, whereas Mark runs an organisation which speaks for landowners and lobbies on their behalf. That point that Mark just raised, Bruce, is crucial because the hit from the power companies every time this happens is awful for us as the ordinary citizens, but for industrial farming, it can be fatal, literally.
Well, it could be. The electricity pipelines were ripped up, literally trees, power lines were down, the dangers were manifest. And if Storm Warwind had have hit through the day, there would have been severe loss of life, which is what happened with Malik. So the whole rural structure was decimated. I don't know what the answer is because you can't legislate for a storm where you get something like this once in 100 years. But we've had Barra, we've had Malik, we're going to get 2 more storms tonight, and there'll be more damage. And some places in Northumberland still haven't got electricity from Saturday morning.
Bruce Jobson, thank you very much indeed. I'm just being told in my ear that the line to Mark's gone down. So when you next talk to him, Bruce, pass my good wishes on to him and say thank you to him as well. Thank you both for joining in our conversation. Talking there about the storms that were in the past. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. There'll be plenty more still to come this afternoon on our main topic of the show. Do you think that there's unfinished business between Ukraine and Russia? Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to call the Russian president in an attempt to de-escalate the tension. But first, let's bring you up to date with all of the latest news, including the current storms.
It's 1:34. Here are the top stories from the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson says the picture on Ukraine's border is increasingly concerning as he urges Russia to avoid a reckless and catastrophic invasion. The Prime Minister is believed to be considering doubling the number of troops deployed to strengthen Europe's borders. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says a situation in which British soldiers would fight alongside Ukraine's against Russia is very unlikely. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have insisted the planned rise in national insurance set for April is the right thing to do. That's despite opposition parties and some Conservative MPs saying it should be halted due to fears of the increase to the cost of living. A second storm is set to hit the UK 24 hours after Storm Malik killed 2 people. Amber weather warnings have been issued for Scotland as Storm Corrie hits the northern half of the UK, where winds of up to 90 miles per hour are expected. Yesterday, a 60-year-old woman in Aberdeen and a 9-year-old boy in Staffordshire were killed by falling trees. The COVID vaccination programme has been extended to around 500,000 vulnerable children in England. Those aged between 5 and 11 who are most at risk from the virus or who live with someone who is immunosuppressed can now get a jab. Relatives of the victims of Bloody Sunday have held a remembrance walk in Londonderry to mark its 50th anniversary. It's one of a number of events being held in the city. 13 people were killed when members of the British Army's Parachute Regiment opened fire on a civil rights march on the 30th of January 1972. Those are the top stories. This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. After the break, it's back to Alistair Stewart and Friends.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's just coming up to 20 to 1, and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and friends here on GB News, TV and radio. We've been discussing today the ongoing Ukrainian and Russian crisis. Is there still unfinished business, and why does it matter to us here in the UK? And as the tensions continue, the United Kingdom has offered to deploy more land, air and sea forces to bolster the defence of NATO countries on their northern and eastern borders. Well, my final guest in this session of My Big Question is Sir Christopher Mayer. Christopher's a former UK ambassador to the United States and also worked inside Number 10. And I'm delighted to say, as you can see, he joins me live. Christopher, great to see you. The headline question I've been trying to work with today is whether Putin is essentially trying to reset the post-Cold War settlement.
In a word, yes, he is. That is his long-term objective. He's not going to achieve it, if at all, anytime soon. But I think he has three priorities here. One is to earn some respect from the West, which he feels he has not had during the full 19 years of his presidency of Russia. Secondly, to put Russia back into the center of European affairs, which he has achieved. And then in the long term, what he would like to do, and this is continuity with the old Soviet Union, is get the United States out of Europe and have a new security dispensation in which Russia is the dominant power.
To achieve those, respect, Russia back at the heart of European affairs, and getting the United States out of Europe, 1 and 3 don't seem to be helped by spoiling for a fight.
Well, you see, this is why, if I dare say this, I think I disagree with Liz Truss, who I believe said earlier on the media today that a war with Ukraine looked very likely. I think a war is unlikely because I think the consequences of the Russians attacking Ukraine, and I may have to eat my words very visibly, the consequences of Russia attacking Ukraine is to make precisely very difficult the strategic objectives which they themselves have set out in the 2 draft treaties which they recently sent, firstly to NATO in Brussels and secondly to the Americans in Washington. In other words, it would be, from a strategic point of view, utterly self-defeating.
Yeah. Let me add something to that. Interesting that and it doesn't surprise me for a moment that you would have looked very carefully not only at what Liz Truss said in the newspapers, but also on other TV stations this morning. But there's also Mr. Heapy, the Armed Services Minister. And both of those contributions left me with an intriguing thought. By deploying extra hardware to Estonia and Cyprus and in the Black Sea, and by Heapy saying, if it does come to a fight, we won't actually be engaged in a fight, we're there in a supportive role. Is there a troubling message here that says you can go into Ukraine, but you can't go any further? You go anywhere near the Baltic states and you're in real trouble.
Yeah, there's a very, very clear distinction here, Alistair, and that is between states who are members of NATO and who benefit from the guarantee in Article 5 of the NATO treaty, that an attack on one is deemed to be an attack on all, and a country like Ukraine wants to join NATO, would love to be in NATO, but isn't in NATO, where the Article 5 obligation on all the member states of NATO does not apply. And you will have heard Ben Wallace say that that is the fundamental reason why we would not have boots on the ground in Ukraine were the Russians to attack. So throughout this entire crisis, what the Russians have known is, A, there will be no boots on the ground from NATO in Ukraine, and B, but by God, if you lay a finger on countries that are members of NATO, like the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, then we will consider that to be an act of war.
Absolutely crucial distinction, and thank you for making it so clearly there. So let's look at NATO itself then, just for a moment, because it seems to me, and we've talked about this in the past, that NATO itself is being profoundly tested and not coming out particularly well. You've got Biden, and this we've certainly talked about at length, slightly more focused on China or Russia-China than on Russia-Ukraine. You've got Germany looking one way on troops and weaponry and France looking another way. Various people playing various games of trying to have their two penneth with Putin, including our own dear Prime Minister. NATO is looking a bit wobbly and a bit sort of fluid.
Well, what I would say to Alistair is, yeah, wobbly was certainly the word before the Ukraine crisis. I mean, Macron, President of France, said NATO was brain dead in 2019. So people were being very rude about NATO. But Putin will have noticed that although there are different perspectives and different views among NATO member states, replicated also inside the European Union, of which we, the Brits, are no longer a member, that his belligerence has already been acted like a shot of adrenaline into the NATO organization. In other words, however wobbly and floppy it may have been before, it is a damn sight tougher and more rigid today. And that is not what he wanted.
No. Absolutely, because one of my earlier guests, our mutual friend Damian Green, observed that one of our biggest worries, and NATO's a part of it, but so too are the personal difficulties, like a brand new chancellor in Germany, a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom who's having his own domestic difficulties, and Biden under fire and virtually collapsed in the polls. Damian said to me, Putin's a clever bunny. He sees a chink through which he can run because they're all over the place and because so many of them are weak.
Well, I might have said that a few weeks ago. I'm less inclined to say that now. The Germans always get into this lather when war comes up for very, very obvious reasons. And to be perfectly honest with you, they have been a weak link in NATO throughout the full membership of the organization. And this all goes back to complexes about the Second World War and so on and so forth. Far more interesting, if we're talking about chinks here, is the position of France, because I think that President Macron sees a chink for himself, either side Putin, to become the great arbiter of European peace. And don't forget that right now, in the first 6 months of this year, France has the presidency, the rotating presidency of the European Union. And I would not be surprised if we get a French initiative somewhere, maybe quite soon, which says, let us have a grand EU-Russia conference, bringing Vladimir Putin back into the heart of Europe and putting Macron at the forefront of European diplomacy.
He might even hold it at Versailles. Now, there would be a beautiful and historic irony.
But
yeah, I know. I think
sitting on the throne with a crown, probably.
Final point, and again, I stressed your relationship. You worked alongside John Major in those days, and you've also been our man in the United States as our ambassador. So you have rich experience in all of these things, and you've been through a few similar crises in your time. Given Boris Johnson's difficulties, is he playing a blinder, or is he making a profound mistake of going too far over Ukraine for the reasons of domestic pressure?
Of course, that's a big question. And I've come to the conclusion that he is doing what a British Prime Minister should do. So let us say that there was none of this hoo-ha about party cake and cakes and dogs and cats and whatever, all the other stuff. Let's say there was nothing like that going on. And you ask yourself the question, what in these circumstances should the United Kingdom do? The United Kingdom being a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, the United Kingdom being a signatory to the Budapest Agreement of 1994, by which Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons in return for guarantees for its sovereignty and independence, which was signed also, I hasten to add, by Russia. Signed by Russia, signed by the United States, signed by Britain, and then by others later on. Now, those two commitments are in and of themselves binding responsibilities on the British government, be it a Boris government or whoever's government. So whether or not he's playing a blinder, I mean, we shall see a bit more by the end of the week, but he is, I think, doing the right thing, engaging in diplomacy on the one hand, giving hardware to the Ukrainians on the other. And I think that's the right two-pronged approach that he should be following.
Christopher, great of you to find time for us this Sunday afternoon. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed, and best to both of you. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, and to you, Alistair. Thanks so much.
Sir Christopher Mayer, former UK ambassador to the United States of America and former insider in Downing Street. Now, before we hear your thoughts on our big topic today, unfinished business between Russia and Ukraine, and in a moment, my take. Let's just give you a reminder of what some of my other guests had to say. First, former Deputy Prime Minister Damian Green, and he told me about what he thinks of Putin and why, in his view, he's trying to achieve what he is.
I think more than a strategist, Putin's an opportunist, and this is, it seems to me, a pretty direct effect of the catastrophic way the West fled from Afghanistan. Because, I mean, you've just done a lot of Cold War history. You can look back in history and see that after the Americans lost in Vietnam, that was when Soviet communism pushed furthest out. There was even an attempt at a communist coup in Portugal in the 1970s. They tried to push further out from Eastern Europe into Western Europe. And I think the same thing's happening now. Putin has decided the West is at a moment of maximum weakness.
Yes.
So, and as you say, it's not just the Russian government. The Russian people think of the Ukrainian people as them, as one of them. The Ukrainians don't, but it's quite deep in the Russian psyche. So yes, this is a move that will be popular in Russia, and so he's trying to overturn the results of the Cold War.
Ewan Grant's a former intelligence analyst covering ex-Soviet states, and he's worked in Ukraine. He thinks Odessa on the coast of the Black Sea could be the key.
I think we need to look very, very carefully. General Hodges, the former head of the American Army in Europe, been warning about this for years. A threat, physical or intimidatory, to Odessa to cut off Ukraine's economic lifeline. So we might be looking at a Gulf of Tonkin incident at sea. So the Type 45 is the one to watch.
Yeah.
The problem is abroad, not everybody is appreciating it. There's a danger we may overplay our hand. We are playing it very well as long as we make sure we keep allies on side. Not a few of them, particularly those who've been compromised by the dirty money. It's not just an Anglosphere problem, particularly Germany. They need to come on board more.
Finally, Valeri Morozov is a Russian exile who has previously worked for the Kremlin. He told me just how real the threat is.
regarding the point is that modern weapons, which have been developed in Russia, give opportunity for Russia, say, for example, in case of provocation from the Ukraine, attack on the separatist border on the separatist republics, to destroy within 5-7 minutes all communication, all control centers, all communication and all commanding centers in Ukraine of the army or state within 5-7 minutes. And Ukraine has no protection.
There you go. Thoughts of my guests. My thoughts upon it. Well, wars often happen by accident, and that's a real concern. If you mass that many soldiers and weapons, they can achieve a critical momentum. The two greatest hopes that we have are that diplomacy and dirty money may possibly just solve the problem. And I don't mean spending dirty money, I mean getting rid of it. Diplomacy can find a strange way through the trickiest of jungles, and Ukraine may be just such a jungle. It tests the resolve and the calibre of the frontline players too, and some leave a little to be desired, as one or two of my guests implied. Some also play dangerous domestic games on the world stage, as Christopher Mayer was just saying about one or two European leaders. But on the dirty money, it is much if what Russia has become, and the power of the oligarchs should not be underestimated. Their wealth, at home and abroad, is what they are all about. So, I hope we're not putting our armed forces in harm's way without thinking it all through. If it is a reset, as I think pretty well all of my guests agreed it was, including the Russian voice that said threat, what threat, we need to think long and hard about what the get-out scenario is as well. To walk away from Ukraine would be bad, and as Christopher Mayer just pointed out, contrary to international treaties that we signed. But it would also be sad, as would a bloody war. So the choices are not simple. The next few days will be crucial, and in truth, I don't know which way it'll play out. But be in no doubt, lives and the future balance of power in Europe and the world are in play. Most importantly, I hope you found my guests' reflections useful, because I certainly did. Now, you've been very busy, as invited, on the emails and the tweets. We gave you a few a little earlier on in the programme. Let's get some more before we go off air. I've got one from Peter. Have we got that we can put up on text? Well, I'll read it, and if they can find it, they'll put it up. If they can't, then they'll go to the next one, which is Hassan. Peter says, I fail to see why we are so gung-ho about this situation. Ukraine is not part of Europe, and they are not in NATO. It has nothing to do with the UK. Once again, we are sabre-rattling, trying to cling on to our empire history. Well, with respect, Peter, I think, as Christopher Mayer just said, there are other treaty obligations to Ukraine that we have, although I agree with you 100%, NATO is at the pounding heart of it. I've now got an email from Hassan. The fracas we witnessed today would not have happened under President Trump. Russia is closely aligned with Europe and America in terms of economy and democracy than the USSR ever was. So, why are there tensions between Russia and Europe and the United States? Why isn't Russia invited to join NATO? That may be an invitation too far, Hassan. Michael comes in via email. How do you expect Putin to take any notice of the West? He's not scared, especially after the Afghanistan flop. I think you were listening to what Damian Green, the former Deputy Prime Minister, was saying. And finally, we have one from Reginald who says, NATO is posing a challenge to Russia by their manoeuvres on the borders. And if they had the sense to move away, Russia would also very likely withdraw. A war would not suit Russia because of the cost, and they would be subject to constant guerrilla warfare, even if they won. Reginald sums up one of the other dimensions of this whole story, and that is, it is game playing to a degree, but with mighty stakes. That's it for today. I'll be back on Friday at 8 o'clock. Until then, a very good afternoon to you. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, in the UK is looking fine for many, but wet and very windy due to Storm Corrie further north. Let's take a look at the details. There should still be some decent sunshine in the southwest this afternoon, though cloud will be starting to build from the west. Temperatures will be around 8 or 9 Celsius. In the southeast, it'll be mostly sunny, though some cloud will develop through the afternoon. Highs of around 7 and 8 Celsius here. Whilst there'll be a few sunny breaks, generally it'll be a cloudier picture across much of Wales with some spots of rain. It'll be a cloudier, windy afternoon for northwest England. Here the rain will start to push in, turning heavier as we go towards the evening. Temperatures under the cloud will be somewhat suppressed. It's looking similar for northeast England, where it'll be mostly cloudy this afternoon. The rain will reach here by the evening. Strengthening winds may lead to some disruption with the risk of gales. It'll be